When we share the changes in the numbers and updates to the number of people who have died, we've had a few people ask whether people fully recover from coronavirus. The answer is yes, absolutely you can, and most people do. These numbers from Johns Hopkins offer some good perspective for you. As of now, just over 3,000 people have died around the world. The number of people who were diagnosed and have since fully recovered, considered to be clear of the virus now, is more than 48,000. When you compare the estimated fatality rates that we have now, coronavirus is significantly more survivable than viruses like SARS, MERS, and Ebola. It is slightly more deadly than the seasonal flu.